Maximize Business Value podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Mastery Partners, where our mission is to equip business owners to maximize business value so they can transition their business on their terms. Our mission was born from the lessons we've learned from over 100 business transactions, which fuels our desire to share our experiences and wisdom so you can succeed. Now here's your host, CEO of Mastery Partners, Tom Bronson.
Hi, this is Tom Bronson, and welcome to Maximize Business Value, a podcast for business owners who are passionate about building long-term sustainable value in their businesses. This episode is part of our series on the value of assessment tools for any organization. Now, you've probably heard about using assessments in your business, and chances are pretty good that you've actually had some exposure to one or two of the assessments that we're going to be talking about during this series sometime during your career. This series explores the best ways to use these assessments to improve your business. Today, we're going to explore DISC. So I'd like to welcome our guest, Julie Chant. She's principal at Action Strategies by Design, a leadership development and team building consulting practice in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Since 2014, Julie has also been a lead and module faculty member for the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program, a wonderful program. If you don't know about that, I would encourage you to go and learn about that. It's a wonderful program that helps many, many businesses. Julie and I actually first met, I think, through Business Navigators, the servant leadership organization here in North Texas that you hear me talk about frequently. So Julie is a certified DISC facilitator. And so today, we're going to talk about using the DISC assessment to drive results in your business. Welcome to Maximize Business Value, Julie.
Thanks, Tom. I'm super excited to be here. One of my passions is talking about DISC and especially sharing the positive impact it can have on individuals, on leaders, teams, and organizations.
Awesome. We're going to dive all into those details. So tell us, before we jump into DISC, tell us a little bit about your background and how did you get into this line of work of leadership development and helping workforces perform better?
So this whole line and my whole career, the whole business really was influenced by my first job out of college. And it was with a psychiatric hospital for severely emotionally disturbed children and adolescents. And there was a whole lot of things about that experience that really influenced my career and the direction that I went. The first is that I had my first exposure to DISC during that experience as a young manager. And I think it really positively impacted the direction of my career in a number of ways. The CEO of the hospital that I reported to was really an excellent leader and mentor. And then if you think about healthy adolescents, and if you think about how good they are at splitting their parents, if the parents aren't on the same page, if they're not really aligned, then multiply that exponentially for emotionally disturbed adolescents, and they'll split the staff. So the culture of the organization was very team-oriented. So I really saw the benefits throughout the organization having that aligned team approach. I subsequently had the opportunity to work for a gentleman that was, in my opinion, not a good leader. And I left the organization as a result of that. So I saw the impact that a really good leader and a really not so good leader could have. And then the organization I went to work for was not team-oriented. However, the regional vice president that I worked for was very team-oriented. And his region consistently had the highest performance. We had the highest contract retention rate, which was very important in this particular business. We had the really great client surveys. The financial performance of the region was among one of the was probably generally the best in the company. And I attributed that to the teamwork and his leadership and the teamwork. So all of those together, those experiences together, really helped me see the value, not just in terms of people and the impact it had on the people, but also the impact it had on the organization of things like effective leadership, of strong team cultures, of communication, of being able to positively channel conflict into new and better ways of doing things.
I love it. I'm a huge fan of these assessments, as you already know, and being able to kind of channel your energy and know how to communicate and work with folks. I just think it's a huge, how lucky you were to have an opportunity to work in an environment, right, and you're in the early part of your career, that gave you an opportunity and exposure to that. Let's talk a little bit about DISC, the DISC assessment. What is DISC? And can you give us maybe a little background on that? I think DISC may be one of the oldest assessments that there is.
So DISC is a 4-quadrant model that looks at really 4 different personality styles, and then it's further divided into sub-styles, but 4 main styles. And it was developed, the theory or the model was developed by a psychologist named William Morton Marston in the early 1920s. So the theory of DISC, which looks at 2 aspects of human behavior, and those 2 aspects really define a lot of human behavior, but they are the need to control the environment and the need for affiliation. So it looks at those are the underlying aspects that it's based on. Now, Marston himself did not develop an assessment. He came up with the theory and the model, and the 4 styles, the 4 quadrants and the styles. He did not develop an assessment. That was developed much later. And today, there's a number of different DISC assessments. So the model, the theory of DISC is actually in the public domain. What's proprietary is the assessments that determine somebody's DISC style, the reports that are developed as a result of the profile information, and the tools that are available. So the DISC that I work with is Everything DISC, and the publisher on that is Wiley Publishing. Sort of a trivia question, something I get asked a lot. Sometimes you'll see DISC written with a small I. Sometimes you'll see it with a capital I. If it's with the small I, it will probably have the little R registered trademark after it. And that means it is the Wiley DISC. So there's a number of different DISC assessments out on the market. And they all use a little bit different assessment to determine somebody's style.
Interesting. Of course, in the second half, we'll talk about a little bit more about the specifics of it, because I know that I've taken the DISC assessment multiple times, and I think there are different methodologies for how the DISC are doing. And I didn't realize, though, that I guess the theory is in the public domain now, and that folks can go out and develop their own DISC assessments. I like to stick with the original here as much as possible, right? So
Yeah.
Well, thanks for that background. We learned a couple of weeks ago in our interview with Dr. Jenny Gray to kick off this series that there are different types of assessments: personality, work style, and cognitive. Sometimes personality are predictive assessments. There's personality, there's predictive assessments, and those are typically used for pre-employment. We're going to learn something new today. Work style or productivity assessments are typically used to improve team and individual performance. And so, Julie, what type of assessment is DISC?
So while DISC is a behavioral style assessment that's driven by personality, right? Our behaviors are driven by personality. it is not predictive. So it is used more to improve team and individual performance. It's really about developing an understanding of yourself, an awareness of your patterns of behavior, and then understanding that the patterns of behavior that other people have, and then being able to adapt to improve those work communication and those working relationships. So it's not predictive, and it shouldn't be. Therefore, it shouldn't be used for hiring. There are, you will probably find you could go Google it and DISC for hiring, and you will probably see people using it. The problem is it doesn't measure any specific characteristic or aptitudes or skills that are necessary for any given job. And the bigger issue is it doesn't compare an individual to other individuals who are successful in the job. So a good hiring assessment is going to take my profile and where I fall on various characteristics or traits, and it's going to compare it to a larger population of people who have been successful in that role or job. So in DISC, there's no comparative group.
And I think as we were preparing for this podcast and having a conversation a couple of weeks ago, you shared with me, if I remember correctly, that you've actually seen people who perform very well in the same job with very different profiles. Is that right?
Yeah. So I had a client who was a property manager, and she had, I think, two or three other people who they were the interface. I don't know if they were called account managers or property managers is probably what they were called. And all three of them were very successful, or four, and all of them had different DISC styles. So the other piece to think about is,
but they were all successful.
They were all successful. You think about sales, there's lots of different types of sales, right? And somebody who's doing very technical sales, you might want somebody with very different skills, aptitude, approach, characteristics than somebody who's doing a more transactional sale. So you really need to be able to look at people performing well in a specific role and then match a candidate's profile to that profile if you're going to use an assessment for hiring.
Right. So I do know that there are lots of folks who use DISC for hiring, but I think it's an important distinction for our audience to understand that it's not a predictive. It is a personality, and it can help with work style, but it's not predictive of, I guess, future performance, or, as you said, doesn't measure specific skills or aptitudes. So.
And the other thing I would add is, just because it's not predictive doesn't mean it's not valid and reliable for what it's meant to do, right? So it's a very highly research-backed assessment for identifying somebody's style, but not for predicting how they're going to perform.
Excellent. Thank you for that explanation. So, how is DISC best used by a business to improve outcomes?
So, it's really used to improve communication, to improve those interpersonal working relationships. It can be used in leadership development. It can be used in team building. It can be used to help create a culture. I think there's some things that DISC does really well in terms of helping people understand, like I had mentioned earlier, themselves and others. One of the things that I always like to look at when I facilitate is how it helps people move from judging differences to valuing differences. And with DISC, we're really talking about differences in approaches, differences in thought patterns. However, as people start to see that, oh, just because somebody's different than me doesn't mean there's something wrong with them. And I actually had a participant in a workshop at the end when we were wrapping up and saying, so they were sharing what they got from it. And she said, I learned that just because somebody's different than me, there's not something wrong. And I thought she was going to say me. And she said with them. So it really helps people understand the value of these different perspectives on a team or in an organization. And by having that, it also starts to open up people's minds, I believe, to valuing other types of differences. So, other types of diversity.
So are there things, by the way, I have to say here, because the way you so eloquently used the word facilitator, it made me realize you're not an administrator of this test. I don't come in, you specifically are a facilitator of this, because if I understand correctly, you use these tests with a team to then facilitate that conversation, which I think it's a nuanced thing, but I like that. Is that the approach that you're kind of bringing together? And are all DISC facilitators, are they called facilitators or?
A lot of time, I don't know that that's standard. I use facilitator rather than trainer, because I believe that I'm facilitating the discussions and the learning, but it really comes from the group dynamics and the group sharing. But what I typically do is a team. It may not be a team, it might be a group of people, but often it's a team within an organization takes the assessment, and then I facilitate a training session with them to really understand and to begin to use this information. Because it's one thing to understand it, right? And I think that's where it oftentimes fails, and many assessments fail. It's one thing to understand it, then it gets shoved into a drawer. It's another thing to have an experience where the learning's integrated and then actually used you look at how you can actually use it to be a more effective team, to be a more effective leader, to improve organizational culture and results.
Wow. I love that. Just when you said that you're a facilitator, it just made me realize how important that role is to helping improve those outcomes, which was the original question. Are there things that the test is trying to help businesses, issues and problems that they're trying to help them solve or avoid in their business?
Yeah, I think there's several. One is DISC is an excellent tool for developing emotional intelligence. So, an emotional intelligence is that it's what sets great leaders, great employees. It's what sets the most effective team members, leaders and team members apart from those who are just technically competent. So if you look at emotional intelligence at its basic, it's understanding yourself, managing yourself and your emotions and your reactions, understanding others, and then managing those interpersonal relationships and interactions. And DISC really helps us do all four of those things. So building, it doesn't measure emotional intelligence, but it is a great tool for developing it. Improved working relationships. You've probably seen a lot of those conflicts that are really their style conflicts, right? Where, I am not real, I'm very private. Somebody else may be very very much more open and want to share more personal information and may ask personal questions. Or my approach is very direct. Somebody else's approach might be not as direct, and that causes interpersonal conflict. By understanding that okay, I'm going to give you an example. My niece does my marketing for me, has been for several years now. Her entire life, she's been told how much like me she is. So I assumed she was a D style, which is what my style is. When she started doing a little bit more regular work for me, and she got a little bit older, so where it would be a little bit more, accurate, her personality had developed more. I had her take the test and she came out as CS, almost directly opposite of me. Now, I had been delegating to her like she was a D style. So I had been giving her, this is what I want. I'd been giving her really challenging assignments. I hadn't given her a lot of detail. As a CS, especially as a young, somewhat inexperienced CS, she really needed more guidance. And by not giving that to her, she was in essence, in many ways, paralyzed, right? Because she was afraid to take action because she wasn't sure what to do. Once I realized that and changed my delegation style, she'd always done good work, but it just became so much easier, right? That friction wasn't there. So that's an example of I think how it can be used to improve. One of the ways that it can be used to improve working relationships.
Isn't that interesting that everyone said that it's basically mini you, right? Mini me. And as it turns out, she actually completes you. She's the opposite.
The opposite. And much more in line with her mom and her dad than with me. So
of course.
Go figure.
So before we take a break, if someone is not using assessments and they're thinking through this series that they want to start using assessments, asking employees or candidates to take an assessment when they haven't used them in the past creates some anxiety, right, among the employees. So what's the underlying, what are they really trying to do here? So how can business owners minimize that anxiety when introducing assessments into their company?
So I think that's a great question. A lot of it comes down to trust, right? If you have a high trust environment, employees probably aren't going to get real anxious over assessments. If you've got a low trust environment, they're probably going to be really anxious. So and we can't assume that everybody that introduces this has a high trust environment, right? Because that's part of what it can help do is build that trust. So I think the first thing is the leader goes first. The leader models the way. So if whatever assessment is, but if they're going to take you're going to ask your team members to take a DISC assessment, you take it first and share your style with them. Talk with them about why you're doing it, the purpose of it, what you hope to get out of it. Be sure as a leader that you're coming from a place of wanting to build and develop, that you're not trying to punish somebody, right? Listen to their concerns, hear their concerns. Sometimes if people are just heard, they'll be more comfortable. I think the big thing is, though, to go first. If there's a leadership team, have the leadership team go first. I have that sometimes within organizations. I'll have the leadership team go first, and then they'll introduce it to the rest of the organization. I think the other thing to keep in mind is, what kind of an assessment are you asking them to do? Asking somebody to do DISC, and one of the beauties of this not being predictive, right, in this particular situation, is that there is no right or wrong style. And if it's facilitated correctly, team members, whoever's taking it, the participants will understand that. So start with a low risk assessment. If you ask somebody, so on the other end of that continuum is a 360-degree assessment, right? Where I take the assessment, my boss takes the assessment, my peers take the assessment, and my direct report or give feedback. It's not the same assessment. So I take the assessment, and then those other groups give feedback. That's called a 360-degree assessment. That is very high risk to the individual, right? Because it's not just what I say, it's what other people say. And there is more of a right or a wrong. So I think it's going first, it's listening, and it's choosing the assessment wisely in terms of the level of psychological risk or anxiety that it's going to cause for the participants.
I love that. And you mentioned something earlier about using this to really improve and develop EQ or emotional intelligence. I've never understood why they call it EQ. I guess it's emotional quotient.
It's a take on IQ.
Of course,
right?
on IQ, I think we've all pretty well agreed that they're very minimal things you can do to improve your IQ, but you really can develop and improve your EQ, right? And using an assessment tool like this can help you do that and can improve. Tell me if I'm wrong here, Julie, you can improve the overall EQ of your leadership team and even your entire organization.
Yeah, absolutely. You can. What you do is you develop a highly a culture of people who have high emotional intelligence, right? And think about not only the performance results you get, but think about how much better a place that is to work, and how much more likely you are to retain good employees.
Mind-blowing indeed. We are talking with Julie Chance. Let's take a quick break. We'll be back in 30 seconds.
Every business will eventually transition, some internally to employees and managers, and some externally to third-party buyers. Mastery Partners equips business owners to maximize business value so they can transition their businesses on their terms using our 4-step process. We start with a snapshot of where your business is today. Then we help you understand where you want to be and design a custom strategy to get you there. Next, we help you execute that strategy with the assistance of our amazing resource network. And ultimately, you'll be able to transition your business on your terms. What are you waiting for? More time? More revenue? If you want to maximize your business value, it takes time. Now is that time. Get started today by checking us out at www.masterypartners.com or email us at info@masterypartners.com to learn more.
We're back with Julie Chance, a DISC certified facilitator. You learned what that meant in the first half. And we're talking about the DISC assessment and how to use it. Now, as our listeners already know, I've taken all of the assessments that we're talking about in this series. So let's use me as the guinea pig here. And first, Julie, what insights can you share about my assessment?
So, as you know, your assessment was what's called the DI, or the dominance influence style. And just knowing that, I would say, and even not knowing you, it's a little hard to separate the two, right? But if I just looked at somebody's profile that I didn't know and I saw that, say probably pretty bold, probably a fairly visionary, like to get results and take quick action and get quick results, enthusiastic, engaging, and somebody who gets bored quickly. I would also say that seeing where your dot fell on the circle, which is towards the edge of the circle, right, the outer edge of the circle, that you probably resonate pretty strongly with the typical characteristics of the DI style. Some of the other that when you're under, oftentimes our strengths overused become weaknesses, right? And that when you're under stress, and under stress, we all change a little bit, right? We find it harder to adapt when we're under stress, that you could become more assertive, or some people might even call it aggressive, and that at times you could overpower others. So that's kind of an overview of the style. I'd also know that well, I have looked to see how we're similar and different. I have the ability to do that, right?
Right.
How our styles are similar and different. I would also say, though, that when I'm working with you, I need to up my enthusiasm and I need to up my energy level a little bit. I probably need to, as a D style, I have a lower need for affiliation, i.e. interaction with people, right? I probably need to take a little bit more of a personal interest and share a little bit more, be a little bit more open personally. So those are some of the insights that I would gain. I'd also say that you're really good at bringing new opportunities to fruition, right? That combination of that seeing bold ideas and that results piece come together to really be good at bringing ideas to fruition and bringing other people along.
Right.
I would say that probably you don't have a high need for stability or for sameness, that you like to have outside appreciation and be recognized for your work, and that probably that while detail may be important to you, you probably don't do a lot of detail. Or while accuracy may be important, that's not what comes naturally to you.
I hate the details. I hate diving into the weeds, but therefore, though, I've had to learn, and I know that about myself. I had to learn that when I have to dive into the details, I want it done accurately the first time so I can get out of the weeds, right? And I don't want to go back to the weeds, right? And so I do tend to get frustrated with folks who are doing that detail work for me that miss details, right? And so that would be part of the person. Now, just really quickly, let's remind folks what the DISC stand for again.
Yeah, so D is dominance, and the people with the D style tend to be very direct, sometimes blunt. They tend to be results oriented. They tend to be fairly fast paced and can be competitive. We used to say that the slogan for somebody with the D or dominant style was my way or the highway. So they tend to be very confident and come to conclusions very quickly and want to move on. Sometimes they don't bring other people along because they come to a decision so quickly, don't necessarily share, aren't necessarily good listeners, and then don't necessarily share. Well, I or influence style tend to be fast paced and have a high need for affiliation. So they tend to be enthusiastic. They tend to be very fast-paced, bold, be visionaries, have a lot of great ideas. The name influence, right? That they bring people along. They like to work in groups. They can be jump from one idea to the other so quickly that things don't get done, right? They're great starters. They're not always great finishers. And then the S or steadiness style, they tend to share that need for affiliation, high need for affiliation, so be very people-oriented. They're very team-oriented. They tend to be a little bit more moderately paced, and they tend to want a more stable environment. They like to get input. So where the D makes all their decisions by nature, now everybody can adapt, right? And as we mature in our styles, we learn to adapt more. But they tend to want to make decisions on their own. They don't feel a need to consult a lot of people. The S style wants to get everybody's input. They're great listeners, and they can be the glue that holds the team together. However, they don't necessarily like change, and they need a little bit more time to get used to change than what the D or the I does. And then the C or the conscientiousness style is they're the more moderately paced and have that low need for affiliation, right? So they like to work alone. They like to have time to do quality work. They don't like to be rushed. And they don't like to put out what they consider to be half-baked work. They want the time to do that. They tend to be very personal. So somebody with the C style, I used to do a lot of work with business development people and using DISC around business development. I used to, and many of those, not all by any means, but oftentimes they were the I style or maybe the S style, or they could have been any, but the I style in particular likes to take people to lunch. So they'd want to take their clients or their customers or their prospects to lunch. Well, the C style oftentimes finds that very uncomfortable and not something they want to do because they're more personal. Now, with friends, yes, but with a sales rep that they don't know very well, that's not something that is going to move you forward in their eyes. It's going to make them uncomfortable. So hence the understanding how to interact with each of those styles, right?
No, wouldn't life be so much easier if we could just like give everybody the personality test and you could just tattoo, I'm a DI right here, a D, or on the side or something like that.
I do know of organizations that actually use it fairly widely. And one organization actually has little like poker chips, colored poker chips. And this was pre-COVID. They took them to meetings with them and laid them on the table in front of them. So
I love that. So people would know, right?
Yeah, you knew what somebody's style was, and that really is integrating it into the culture and keeping it alive. When somebody does that, it's really great for you get a lot of return on investment, right? When you use it to that extent.
Yeah, I will tell you that I've been guilty of, the program of the week, right? The program du jour, and letting those things fall off. But that's somebody who's really let the assessment permeate their culture and has become a part of who they are. Now, it's not surprising that since I'm a high D I, right? So a DI, kind of right on that border, that I would lead by example, right? And so I would be that guy who says, okay, I'm going to start doing this. So I'm going to go take the test first and share it with everybody because I want to lead in that way. So what could a business owner who has someone with my personality type, how would they use that information to their advantage?
So one of the things I want to really emphasize is it's really using it to everybody's advantage, right? Because when this is part of the culture, relationships are smoother, that friction's gone. I think, the example I gave earlier with my niece, knowing what her style was, knowing what my style was, I was able to delegate more effectively. I really think DISC is a great tool. While it's not a tool for hiring, it's a great tool for onboarding. So as a company brings new employees on, you can really use it to integrate them into the team, to understand from the get-go as a business owner how you're similar, how you're different, where the friction points may be, what your strengths are, what their strengths are, how to maybe assign work to the extent possible based on that knowledge and information. With that DI style, if you've got an S employee or an SC employee with somebody with the SC style, then you're really going to have to probably listen more you're going to need to slow it down a little bit if you're going to effectively communicate with them, especially early on. Now, they also have, it goes two ways, right? So employees, if you know that you have a DI boss and a boss with the DI style, and you're a CS style, okay, you may have to move a little quicker. You may need to not take the directness personally. So it goes both ways. But by understanding your style and your team members' styles, you can delegate more effectively, you can motivate more effectively, you can capitalize on strengths more effectively, and really you can get better results, and you can do it with greater ease and flow.
It really sounds like there's a possibility that you should be using a predictive type of a test for pre-employment, and then as you're onboarding. I love the fact that you said, let's do it when you're onboarding, right? As you're onboarding, give them then DISC tests so that they can work sort of in tandem with the predictive test, and then the DISC test, which will tell you how kind of work styles and how to more effectively work together. Has that ever been the case that you've worked with a client that actually uses a predictive test in pre-employment and then uses the DISC in the business as a part of their culture initiative?
I personally have not. There may be some of the larger organizations that I work with that may be doing that, and I'm not aware of it. But yeah, they're two very different things, right? One is to get the right person for the job. The other is to have them working with everybody on the team or within the organization that they work with as effectively as possible, and have them. So yeah, they would work very well together.
I think so. So yeah, we've stumbled onto a new business opportunity to find ways to work more closely together with other assessment. What are there any types of businesses that specifically should consider using DISC?
I think I'm biased, right? I think all businesses could benefit from it. I think if, there's no one industry, there's no one type of organization, size of organization. I've used it with organizations as small as 2 or 3 people up to enterprise organizations that have, 50,000 employees. So I think that the ones that shouldn't use it are ones that want to pigeonhole, or where there's I think I may have mentioned to you earlier that I have seen business owners say, I only want to hire C's, or I don't want any D's on my team, or I don't want any S's on my team. I've heard it go every style. And so if it's being used for that, I don't think that's not a great way to use it. The other thing is, I think if a business is going to use it, especially with the Catalyst platform that allows everybody to look at how they work together, everybody that's taken it within the organization, look at how they work together, that if they're going to invest in it, then look at how they can integrate it into that culture and use it on an ongoing basis.
Interesting. So yeah, so somebody who wants to do that, to really kind of control or pigeonhole or don't allow any of these on my team, that is the opposite of having that open culture, right?
Right.
So beware. Don't use these tests in that way. Look, before we go, let's give a shameless plug for your business. So what sets Action Strategies apart from other leadership development firms?
I think one of the things is my background is marketing, operations, management background. Many leadership firms, the facilitators, the people who interact with the customers, do the trainings, et cetera, come from a human resources background. And that's, that it's a little different because when I'm in the trainings and when I'm facilitating the training, I've lived the operations life that many of these people in the trainings have. So that's one thing. It's just a little bit, I have a little bit different perspective on what my background is. I think the other thing is really wrapped up in what our core values are. And our core values are really about practicing what we teach, using it within our business, about looking for win-win outcomes for all involved. And that's one of the things I think that one of the reasons I love DISC and all the assessments I use is that I truly believe not only does it lead to better results, because as a D style, results are really important to me, it also leads to better working relationships. And so it leads to more ease and flow. So we really look at how can we make life easier for everybody that we work with, and how can we add value to all of our stakeholders. And then we use the products we sell, right? So I sell these products into enterprise organizations and support their learning and development people in using the products. I couldn't do that effectively if I wasn't also doing facilitation and using them in facilitation. So I think all of those things are what make us a little bit unique and a little bit different than some of the other organizations that are out there.
That's awesome. I've had the opportunity to watch Julie work, and we've worked side by side inside Business Navigators for many years. And so I can vouch for everything that she says here. I think this should be a wonderful firm. If you're thinking about doing something in your business, then you should definitely reach out, and we'll tell you how to do that in just a second. So one last business question here. This podcast is all about maximizing business value. What is the one most important thing you recommend business owners do to build value in their business?
Pay attention to culture. Pay attention and intentionally build that culture. I think a culture of trust, a culture of teamwork, know your values, your core values, and build the business around those core values. Because what that does, and I think today when there's the great resignation, the great pause, the tsunami turnover, whatever you want to call it, when people are doing a lot of movement from job to job, right? Culture is one of those things that can attract the right employees and help you keep the right employees. And at a certain level, if somebody's making, minimum wage, 50 cents more, $1 more is going to get them to move probably, right? But at a certain level, it becomes less about the money and more about the work experience. And culture is what can help you attract and keep those employees. And it's the employees and the work the employees do that ultimately bring value to the business.
That is a mouthful. I could not agree with you more completely. I used to say that the number one role of a business owner is to be the chief culture officer, CCO, to be always on the lookout for culture. There were times when certainly I lost sleep over my business, but I can tell you, as I look back and reflect on my career, 40 years in business and all of the businesses I've owned, the one thing that kept me up more frequently at night than anything else was having something wrong with my culture. And how do I fix this? Right. And so using an assessment like this can help you do that. I love your answer, and I agree with you completely. However, I'm not that just because I love your answer, Julie, doesn't mean I'm going to let you off the hook. I have to ask you my follow-up question to that is, and since you administer or since you facilitate personality tests, I can't wait to hear the answer to this. Your bonus question is, what personality trait has gotten you into the most trouble through the years?
Definitely the bluntness and the lack of patience. And over time, I've gotten to where most of the time I can mitigate that, right? However, if I when I'm under stress, I am not as good as mitigating it, and it's damaging. When you blow up at somebody, it's damaging to relationships. And just because you're over it in 5 minutes or 5 seconds doesn't mean that the person you blew up at is over it. And that has definitely, over the years, something that certainly I've learned to do it less and less. But that would definitely be losing my temper would be the thing that's gotten me in the most. And it's very much a D-style trait.
Yep. That I was going to say, you and I share that. And I will tell you, you said something important there too. And that is that we as high Ds have the ability to, once we blow up, it's over, right? Mm-hmm. Moving on. And I had a situation in my career one time where we had a dealer, reseller of our products. And one time I just absolutely blew up at this guy over something that he needed a good tongue lashing. And, but the next day I'm over it. 6 or 8 months later, maybe a year later, this reseller called me to tell me that he was leaving our organization to go on to something else. And I said, well, I need to know, because you've been such a wonderful reseller and so really good for our organization. What was it? He said, Tom, I never got over that time that you blew up at me. And I was stunned. In fact, I didn't even remember the incident when I blew up at him. And so it's really important for those of us that are high D to realize that we can leave a lasting impression on the other personality types. Yeah. So we have to be careful about that, right? And I really learned there, oh boy, I probably shouldn't, I should learn how to control that a little bit better. So that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. How can our viewers and listeners get in touch with you?
Well, our website is action-strategies, plural, strategies.com. The phone number is 972-701-9311. And my email is jchance, JCHANCE, at action-strategies.com.
Awesome. Thank you.
And LinkedIn, I'm very active on LinkedIn. So.
Yes. Yeah, very much so. Thank you for being our guest today.
Thanks for having me. I've enjoyed it. What fun. Thanks for taking the assessment and being the guinea pig.
Absolutely. I love this stuff. So I guess that's probably a trait of being a DI as well, is that I'm okay. I'm a little bit of an open book.
Yeah, that's the I. That's the influence piece.
Yeah, exactly. So you can find Julie Chance on LinkedIn or at action-strategies, plural.com. And of course, you can always reach out to me and I'll be happy to make a warm introduction to my good friend. Next week, this series will continue and we'll find out more stuff about me and my assessments. You don't want to miss that. So this is the Maximize Business Value podcast, where we give practical advice to business owners on how to build long-term sustainable value in your business. Be sure to tune in each week and follow us wherever you found this podcast, and give us a comment or a suggestion. And if there's something you'd like us to explore in the future, some business issue that you'd like us to talk about, just let me know. I will find an expert and we will have a future podcast on that. Until next time, I'm Tom Bronson, reminding you to use the assessments wisely and for their intended purpose, while you maximize business value.
Thank you for tuning into the Maximize Business Value podcast with Tom Bronson. This podcast is brought to you by Mastery Partners, where our mission is to equip business owners to maximize business value so they can transition on their terms. Learn more on how to build long-term sustainable business value and get free value-building tools by visiting our website, www.masterypartners.com. That's master with a Y, masterypartners.com. Check it out.
That was perfect. I wouldn't make any changes on that.